In the sprawling, neon-soaked metropolis of Bangkok, where demand for housing should drive prices skyward, an impossible paradox exists. On the periphery of the city, entire towers stand as monuments to silence, luxurious, modern, yet utterly vacant. We aren't talking about bad neighborhoods. These are premium locations, often near new transit lines. The rent is a fraction of the market rate, a suspicious, tempting whisper, promising comfort for almost nothing. But when you look closely, past the fresh paint and the promise of a deal, you realize the low price isn't a discount. It's a desperate attempt to lure new souls into a silence that has already devoured the last. The question isn't who can afford these places, but why no one can stand to stay.
The curiosity gap widens immediately upon entry. The air inside these buildings is not the cool, conditioned air of commerce. It is thick, heavy, carrying a strange metallic scent, even in units that were professionally cleaned yesterday. Property managers, slick and overly eager, dismiss the vacancy as a temporary market correction, but their eyes betray them. They refuse to show units after sunset. They speak quickly, avoiding any mention of the previous tenants, who, according to local whisper networks, rarely break their leases legally. They simply evaporate, leaving behind perfectly good furniture, clothes, sometimes even cooking food on the counter. It's as if they decided in a split second that whatever savings they achieved were not worth the cost of another night within these concrete cages.
Investigators, both official and unofficial, have pored over the data. No structural flaws, no detectable gas leaks, no widespread crime spike in the area. Yet the pattern is undeniable. Move-in averages 12 days. Evacuation averages 3 a.m. Former tenants, if they can be found and convinced to speak, which is rare, all tell fragmented stories that share a terrifying core. It always starts with the noise, or rather, the lack of it. A silence that doesn't feel natural, a sound-dampening void where city sounds simply disappear. Then comes the feeling of extreme, focused pressure, usually centered near the ventilation systems or the elevators. They report feeling perpetually watched, not by neighbors, but by something inside the walls themselves, something ancient and deeply displeased with human habitation. Imagine the humid night descends. You are alone in your cheap, magnificent apartment. You are convinced you have beaten the system. You close your eyes, only to be jarred awake by the overwhelming sensation of displacement. It's not just cold, it's a localized drop in temperature right by your bed. You reach out, but there is nothing there. The shadows in the corner, previously benign, now seem to possess a heavy, liquid quality, threatening to spill over. People describe hearing very faint, rhythmic tapping, too soft to be structural, too insistent to be wind. It often starts near the bathroom, slowly, methodically, moving closer to the master bedroom door over the course of the long, silent night. This isn't just standard Thai ghost lore. This feels predatory, intellectual, designed specifically to erode sanity until escape is the only biological imperative remaining.
The most chilling accounts concern what happens when you attempt to film or record the phenomenon. Tenants who set up motion-activated cameras reported 2 key failures. First, the batteries drained completely and instantaneously, often rendering the equipment useless by midnight. Second, the few clips that survived showed profound visual corruption. Not static, but strange geometrical warping of the footage, focused primarily on doorways. One former tenant, who fled Building C, 14th floor, swore that when he viewed his footage, the doorway to his balcony appeared not as a rectangle, but as a stretched, narrow oval, as if the very geometry of the space was being strained by an unseen force. This distortion, they claim, is the true face of the apartment's cheap price, a deal made with a geometry that exists outside of human perception. We contacted the construction companies responsible, but faced layers of bureaucratic stonewalling and frightened denials. The local laborers, however, tell a different, hushed history. They speak of the land itself, old rice paddies built upon ancient, often desecrated burial sites. These particular plots were notorious for construction delays, not due to permits, but due to inexplicable equipment failures and repeated severe accidents during the foundation pouring. The spiritual energy here was said to be not just residual, but actively resistant to the weight of the concrete towers. They built upwards, seeking to escape the earth, only to find that the moment the tenants fled.
The true terror of these Bangkok periphery complexes lies in the cyclical nature of the evacuations. Every time a tenant flees, the darkness gathers momentum. The cheap price is not a sale, it's a necessary sacrifice to keep the entity fed with fresh anxiety. When a unit sits vacant for too long, the energy begins to bleed into the occupied units nearby. This forces the adjacent tenants out, widening the scope of the vacancy. Experts speculate that the buildings are not merely haunted, but are acting as giant concrete resonators, amplifying a malicious intent drawn from the violated earth below. The silence you feel isn't peace. It's the sound of the entire structure holding its breath, waiting for the next unsuspecting family to sign the lease.
One specific detail persists across multiple testimonies from different buildings. The children always see it first. While adults feel the cold dread, the children describe a figure standing in the opposite corner of the room, too tall for the ceiling, composed entirely of negative light. They call it the shadow weaver. It doesn't scream, it doesn't throw things, it simply stands and watches. But the instant the child meets its gaze, a deep, pervasive feeling of hopelessness washes over them, dissolving their will to remain. This is why the flight is always sudden, always desperate. The parents are responding to their child's psychic breakdown, the visceral, overwhelming realization that their home is currently sharing space with something fundamentally antagonistic to life. We attempted to establish contact with the most affected unit, Tower E, 21st floor. This apartment has seen 6 different tenancies in 8 months. The landlord tried to sweeten the deal further, offering the first 3 months free. When we approached the door, the temperature dropped noticeably, despite the intense external humidity. The handle felt slick, almost greasy, even though it was clean. Inside, the sheer scale of the silence was deafening. If you held your breath, you could hear your own heartbeat echoing back at you from the empty walls. It was here, standing in the living room, that the feeling of pressure became unbearable, pushing down from the ceiling, whispering the single thought into our minds: you have intruded.
The cheap price is the hook, but the true cost is paid in sleep and sanity. The entity doesn't want money. It wants the anxiety and the despair that comes with realizing your supposed sanctuary is actually your cage. Think about the desperation of those families who fled in the middle of the night, leaving passports, electronics, wallets, the very symbols of modern life behind. Their primal fear overcame economic sense and logical planning. They ran, knowing that the thing in the apartment was patient, but relentless, tightening its hold with every passing minute of darkness. And every time they run, they reinforce the horror, ensuring that the next tenant, drawn by the irresistible siren song of the low rent, will find the present stronger, hungrier, and far more deeply entrenched in the concrete heart of the structure.
What are the authorities doing? Nothing substantial. They label it as a localized economic downturn fueled by speculative development. But the truth is, these buildings are known secrets in certain circles, places only visited by those desperate enough or foolhardy enough to challenge the darkness for a few saved baht. The developers continue to build, continuing to violate the earth, and the empty towers continue to await their new victims. If you ever find yourself searching for an apartment on the outskirts of Bangkok, and the price seems too good, if the property manager seems too eager, and if the silence in the hallways feels too heavy, remember this story. Remember that sometimes the only way to fill a void is to let the darkness rush in and claim the space as its own.
The cheap price is not a kindness. It is the price of admission to a nightmare that has no escape clause. The mystery of Bangkok's empty apartments remains unsolved,
sealed tight within the concrete of dozens of silent, towering tombs. We leave the periphery now, returning to the noise and light of the living city, but the silence we heard lingers. Be warned, sometimes the cheapest thing you can buy is the most expensive price you can pay. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and be mindful of the bargains that promise the world but ask for your soul in return. If this journey into the dark side of Bangkok intrigued and terrified you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates on the mysteries lurking beneath the surface of our world.